reading the definition from the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary of a tipping point. Here's what it says. A point at which a series of small changes or incidents become significant enough to cause a larger, more important, and often irreversible change. When I give you that definition of a tipping point, you want to change anything, delete anything, add anything?
Why do they put the word irreversible in? I'm a little more interested this time around in the dark side, in the ways in which rules of epidemics are being kind of used against us. I mean, it's the signature story of the first book was the decline of crime in New York City. The signature story of this book is the opioid crisis, which I remain completely baffled as to why that's not a bigger. It's 100 in the United States. It's 120,000 deaths a year now. Vietnam was 60,000 American deaths in 10 years. We do that in 6 months with the opioid crisis. Vietnam turned America upside down. Has anyone even mentioned the opioid crisis in this election cycle? It just is something that people take for granted, which I find astonishing.
What do you think that is?
I mean, I don't have a good explanation. I think, over time you get it. It's been going on for so long, I've gotten a year into it. I think it was a little more shocking 10 years ago, perhaps. And one of the points I make in the book is that it's not a national epidemic. It is a exceedingly regional, localized epidemic. And I think those are harder for the rest of the population to track. And that idea that epidemics respect borders and can be highly localized is a very important part of this book.
So this one's focusing on negative epidemics. Is that a fair term? Negative epidemics. We live in pretty polarized times, especially in the United States. Here too, much of the Western world, much of the world. As you're looking at sort of negative forces at play, do you think we're reaching a point? I think a lot of us are hopeful that we're reaching that tipping point, that we're not so divided. Like, how are you looking at the world right now?
I don't really believe in the divided stuff. So one of the arguments of this book is that we need to be aware of how asymmetrical epidemics are. They're driven by tiny groups of people. So for example, that chapter on COVID, which points out this fact, which when you breathe out of your mouth and nose or talk, come little tiny droplets of moisture called aerosols, microscopic droplets. When you have COVID, there's a little viral particle inside every one of those droplets. You can measure the amount of aerosols being produced by breathing into this box. Measures it with lasers. If I made this entire room breathe into the box and measured everyone's aerosol production, what you would discover would not be a bell curve distribution. You would discover that virtually everyone in this room would produce the same number of aerosols, and it would be very, very small. On the scale, like less than 100. But we would discover, there's 1,000 people in this room, there would be 10 people who would blow not 100, but 3,600. So 36x more than the norm. Those 10 people are all that matter, right? If I'm one of those 10 and I have COVID right now, I'm sorry, but guys, it's over. You're all gonna go home sick.
You get a book and you get COVID.
Yeah, and you get a little gift, double tap. And so understanding that, so if we're trying to prevent COVID, all we should care about are the 10, right? The rest of you don't matter. So the narrative we had going into COVID was, in that sense, incorrect. It said that we're all equally culpable in the spread of this virus, so we all have to stay home. We all have to wear masks. We all have to take precautions. And the real answer is, no, actually, we don't. We need to know who the 10 are. They have to stay home. Right? Now, that's really, you can see.
Let's play out this thought experiment.
There's a whole level of complication. But that's when you learn about an epidemic, those are the kinds of uncomfortable facts you learn. Now, that's a little bit of truth that can help you deal very effectively with the next epidemic. There's also a little bit of truth that makes your life complicated, right? And all kinds of levels. Anyway, to answer your question, when you look at negativity online, 80% of fake news comes from 0.1% of active social media users. 0.1%. They're extreme, they just have a megaphone. And we look at the effects of these small number of people shouting in a very loud voice, and we think it's us. It's not us. What do they do with us? A bunch of whack jobs in their basement. Like, it's just not. And once we learn that, oh, most people are not doing that. If you look at anti-vax, someone looked at all of the anti-vax nut job postings during the pandemic. 75% of all social media on like railing against the COVID vaccine came from 3 sources. Once you understand that that's what we're looking at this radically asymmetrical phenomenon, and the greatest mistake is to think that that kind of distribution stands for all of us. It doesn't. So the optimistic take is at some point we'll wake up to the fact that the ocean is being polluted by a small number of people, and if we just ignored them, we would go back to normal.
That's a good reminder for all of us. I am as guilty, I think, as most people of thinking, we live in these really kind of insanely horrible, divisive times and worry about how we're going to get through. So that's a good reminder. The Revenge of the Tipping Point, like all your books, is wonderful storytelling. So I'm going to get you to tell us a couple of them. Let's start with Poplar Grove. This is a pseudonym for a real town in the United States. Yeah. What happens in Poplar Grove?
I stumbled across the work of these 2 sociologists, and they studied suicide, particularly adolescent suicide. And someone had randomly called them up and said, oh, if you're interested in that, you should really come to my town. And so they go to this town, and they call it Poplar Grove. And it is this incredibly beautiful, it's the perfect town. It literally, if you went there, you would say, oh my God, I want to move here. It is gorgeous. It's like the houses are amazing. It's really, everyone loves each other. The neighbors all have block parties, and the kids play on the streets, and it's just this kind of like, it's the best high school in the state. It's just, they have like, a community center that everyone goes to every day, and they ride horses on horsing trails, and they sail on the lake. It's just, this really is. And this place had this suicide epidemic at their high school that they couldn't get rid of. And the reason this is of interest is that when we think about the kind of community that would be beset with a mental health crisis like that, we don't think of Poplar Grove. We think of the opposite. We think of a place where the kids are alienated and ignored, and where there's no strong sense of community, where there is, we think of a place that is kind of at the bottom end of every social problem. We don't think of the perfect community as having that problem. So these guys tell the story of how it is an apparently perfect place could be beset with a suicide crisis, right? And it's an incredibly, when I went there, and I was riding around with this, the chapter opens with me riding around with this real estate agent there, and he was showing me the town and how amazing it was. And I'm like, it's fantastic. People, they never leave, their kids come back, it's a perfect community. These 2 kids in high school. I said, well, where do you live? He goes, I don't live here. I said, why don't you live here? He says, what, am I crazy? It's like, oh my God, this is it, right? He got it. He understood there was something toxic about perfection. And so the chapter is all about toxicity of that kind of perfection, and that the idea that parents would have moved to a town and constructed a place out of a fear for their children's well-being, and in the course of doing that, created a place that was dangerous to their children's well-being, right? It was the be careful what you wish for phenomenon. And I think of that as being powerfully symbolic of so many of the problems of upper middle class society in North America are, I think, self-inflicted wounds.
What does the town do to try and address going over this tipping point?
So far, as far as I can tell, very little. There are suicide epidemic has been going on for a decade or more, and the researchers have. It has apparently ebbed a little bit, but the point of these 2 people, these 2 sociologists, Anna Muller and Seth Arberton, they've identified multiple towns like this across North America, and they've moved on to another one that has an even worse problem. And this is newly emerging thing of
having this monoculture.
Yeah, having these. Yeah, the problem that they identified as as the cause of the town's malaise was that it was a monoculture. That normally when you think of a high school is a place that has multiple social groups. And then when a student enters the high school, there are multiple identities that they can find for themselves at an age where they are trying to find an identity for themselves, right? And so that's why you have in this, the stereotypical high school has the nerds and the jocks and the goths and the whatever. This high school has one social group, and that is the socially successful, athletically gifted, brilliant student going to an Ivy League school. And so if you don't succeed in that incredibly specific, incredibly demanding identity, you lose, right? So I never, until that point, I had never thought of the kind of stereotypical diversity of a high school as being a part of why the high school experience was resilient and was welcoming. I thought of it as, like most parents, I just assumed, oh, it's kind of problematic that there are subgroups within this high school that reject academic success. And I realized, no, that's actually part of what makes this a socially healthy place.
The diversity.
Yeah.
You have so many great stories in this book, using something specific like Poplar Grove to illuminate these bigger trends. You call these over stories.
Mm-hmm.
And one that stands out, and I think this is the one that you like talking about, and one of your favorites, is the LA Survivors Club.
Yeah.
Which blew my mind when I heard you talking about it. I still believe it, but still can't believe it. So tell our audience that story.
Yeah, I have this friend named Michael, who a good friend of mine, and I was going for a walk once with Michael, and Michael's great aunts were Holocaust survivors. And Michael said, but of course they never talked about it. I said, really? You've known them all his life. It's like, yeah, never came out. And they said, but of course no one talked about it. It's like, really? No one talked about it? I said, yeah. No one talked about it. He's like, no, the Holocaust, talking about the Holocaust is a relatively recent thing. And so I didn't believe him. And so I started reading about it. It turns out there's an enormous amount of scholarship around this very fact, that the fact that the Holocaust was kind of discovered in the 80s. And it was absent until that point. For 40 years after the end of 35 years after the end of the Second World War, it was a kind of forgotten fact. So I went back and I got the textbooks. If you were studying European 20th century history in college in the 1960s and 70s, there were a couple of standard textbooks that you would read. So I went back and got those exact editions and read them, thinking, all right, when they got like 3 chapters on the Second World War, they're going to have a whole section on what the Nazis did to the Jews. No, they would have at most a paragraph. It would be like, this is an exact quote from one of the textbooks. These are the textbook. The Nazis established camps for communist gypsies and Jews, period. Or one of them has a brief mention of Anna Frank, a German girl whose plight did much to alert the West to what was happening in Germany, period. First of all, yes, she's German, but she's Jewish, which you think